My name is Jessica Thompson, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 15 years, I've commanded naval vessels through some of the most dangerous waters on Earth, earned commendations that most people will never see, and led rescue operations that saved countless lives. But standing in that university parking lot, watching my own mother shake her head in disgust while my brother Michael adjusted his medical school graduation cap, I felt smaller than I had since I was 12 years old. The words still ring in my ears like sonar pings that won't fade. "Jessica's always been the disappointment," my mother said to Dr. Hayes, Michael's fiancée, her voice carrying just loud enough for me to hear every syllable. "She dropped out of college, vanished for years, and now she shows up looking like she just rolled out of bed. Poor Michael deserves better family support on his big day." I stood there in my simple black dress, the one I'd bought at a discount store 3 states over during my drive from Norfolk. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I simply reached into my small purse and pulled out the phone I'd been carrying for 2 days, the one that had been buzzing with calls I hadn't answered. I looked at my mother, at Michael's confused expression, at the gathering crowd of relatives and friends, and I pressed a single number. The response was immediate and professional. "Admiral Thompson, we're 30 minutes out. Shall we proceed with the planned arrival?" I nodded once, keeping my eyes locked on my family's faces as understanding began to dawn. "Affirmative. Proceed as discussed." That was when everything changed. That was when 15 years of silence, 15 years of letting them believe their version of my story, 15 years of protecting national security secrets that required me to let my own family think I was a failure, all came crashing down like a controlled demolition. But the explosion wasn't immediate. It was methodical, precise, and completely unavoidable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other family gathering in the Thompson household, which is to say it started with me being reminded of all the ways I didn't measure up. I'd driven 8 hours from Virginia, taking leave that I technically shouldn't have been able to get, just to watch Michael receive his medical degree from Riverside University. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush I'd volunteered for. Michael had always been the golden child. Even as kids, he was the one who brought home perfect report cards, who charmed teachers and neighbors, who made our parents beam with pride at every school function. I was the restless one, the one who asked too many questions, the one who stared out windows dreaming of horizons that stretched beyond the borders of our small Ohio town. When Michael announced he was going to medical school, the celebration lasted for weeks. When I told them I was leaving for the Naval Academy, the silence lasted even longer. Our father Robert had served in Vietnam. He understood duty, sacrifice, the call to something greater than yourself. He was the only one who didn't try to talk me out of leaving Riverside University after my sophomore year. He was also the only one who might have understood why I couldn't tell them where I was really going, what I was really doing, why my letters home were always vague and carefully worded. But Dad died 4 years ago, taking with him the only bridge between the life I'd chosen and the family I'd left behind. The graduation ceremony was held at the university's outdoor amphitheater, a sprawling venue that could accommodate the hundreds of families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. I'd arrived early, hoping to find a quiet spot in the back, where I could watch Michael receive his diploma without drawing attention to myself. But my mother had other plans. Patricia Thompson had spent 40 years perfecting the art of public embarrassment disguised as concern. She found me sitting alone, checking my phone for messages I couldn't answer in front of her, and immediately launched into what she probably thought was a loving intervention. "Jessica, honey, you look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating enough? You know, Dr. Hayes was asking about you earlier, wondering what you do for work these days." The implication was clear. I was the family mystery, the daughter who'd disappeared into some unknown life that was probably too shameful to discuss in polite company. I'd learned years ago that the truth would only make things worse. How do you explain to your mother that you can't tell her about your job because it involves classified operations? How do you describe leading humanitarian missions in international waters when she's convinced you're probably working at a gas station somewhere? Michael's fiancée, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, approached us with the kind of polite smile that barely concealed curiosity. She was everything my mother had probably hoped I would become: educated, successful, well-dressed, the perfect partner for her perfect son. Jessica, it's so nice to finally meet you. Michael talks about you all the time. The lie was delivered with medical precision, smooth and practiced. I shook her hand and offered my own practiced smile. Congratulations on your engagement. Michael's lucky to have found someone who shares his passion for helping people. It was the truth, even if everything else about this conversation felt like performance art. That's when my mother made her mistake. She'd been building up to it all morning, this moment when she could finally address the elephant that followed me to every family gathering. Jessica's always been our free spirit, she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that parents use when they're trying to spin failure into something more palatable. She started college here at Riverside, but it just wasn't the right fit. She's been finding herself ever since. Finding myself. As if the last 15 years had been some extended gap year adventure instead of a career that had taken me to 6 continents and earned me responsibilities that would have terrified most people. As if the uniform hanging in my Norfolk apartment, with its ribbons and insignia that told the story of missions I could never discuss, was just elaborate dress-up. But I didn't correct her. I couldn't. Because some secrets are bigger than family pride, and some truths are worth protecting even when they make you look like everything you're not. My name is Jessica Thompson, and I'm 38 years old. For the past 15 years, I've commanded naval vessels through some of the most dangerous waters on Earth, earned commendations that most people will never see, and led rescue operations that saved. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Countless lives. But standing in that university parking lot, watching my own mother shake her head in disgust while my brother Michael adjusted his medical school graduation cap, I felt smaller than I had since I was 12 years old. The words still ring in my ears like sonar pings that won't fade. Jessica's always been the disappointment, my mother said to Dr. Hayes. Michael's fiancée, her voice carrying just loud enough for me to hear every syllable. She dropped out of college, vanished for years, and now she shows up looking like she just rolled out of bed. Poor Michael deserves better family support on his big day. I stood there in my simple black dress, the one I'd bought at a discount store 3 states over during my drive from Norfolk. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I simply reached into my small purse and pulled out the phone I'd been carrying for 2 days, the one that had been buzzing with calls I hadn't answered. I looked at my mother, at Michael's confused expression, at the gathering crowd of relatives and friends, and I pressed a single number. The response was immediate and professional. Admiral Thompson? We're 30 minutes out. Shall we proceed with the planned arrival? I nodded once, keeping my eyes locked on my family's faces as understanding began to dawn. Affirmative. Proceed as discussed. That was when everything changed. That was when 15 years of silence, 15 years of letting them believe their version of my story, 15 years of protecting national security secrets that required me to let my own family think I was a failure, all came crashing down like a controlled demolition. But the explosion wasn't immediate. It was methodical, precise, and completely unavoidable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other family gathering in the Thompson household, which is to say, it started with me being reminded of all the ways I didn't measure up. I'd driven 8 hours from Virginia, taking leave that I technically shouldn't have been able to get, just to watch Michael receive his medical degree from Riverside University. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like walking into an ambush I'd volunteered for. Michael had always been the golden child. Even as kids, he was the one who brought home perfect report cards, who charmed teachers and neighbors, who made our parents beam with pride at every school function. I was the restless one, the one who asked too many questions, the one who stared out windows dreaming of horizons that stretched beyond the borders of our small Ohio town. When Michael announced he was going to medical school, the celebration lasted for weeks. When I told them I was leaving for the Naval Academy, the silence lasted even longer. Our father, Robert, had served in Vietnam. He understood duty, sacrifice, the call to something greater than yourself. He was the only one who didn't try to talk me out of leaving Riverside University after my sophomore year. He was also the only one who might have understood why I couldn't tell them where I was really going, what I was really doing, why my letters home were always vague and carefully worded. But Dad died 4 years ago, taking with him the only bridge between the life I'd chosen and the family I'd left behind. The graduation ceremony was held at the university's outdoor amphitheater, a sprawling venue that could accommodate the hundreds of families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. I had arrived early, hoping to find a quiet spot in the back where I could watch Michael receive his diploma without drawing attention to myself. But my mother had other plans. Patricia Thompson had spent 40 years perfecting the art of public embarrassment disguised as concern. She found me sitting alone, checking my phone for messages I couldn't answer in front of her, and immediately launched into what she probably thought was a loving intervention. "Jessica, honey, you look tired. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating enough? You know, Dr. Hayes was asking about you earlier, wondering what you do for work these days." The implication was clear. I was the family mystery, the daughter who disappeared into some unknown life that was probably too shameful to discuss in polite company. I'd learned years ago that the truth would only make things worse. How do you explain to your mother that you can't tell her about your job because it involves classified operations? How do you describe leading humanitarian missions in international waters when she's convinced you're probably working at a gas station somewhere? Michael's fiancée, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, approached us with the kind of polite smile that barely concealed curiosity. She was everything my mother had probably hoped I would become: educated, successful, well-dressed, the perfect partner for her perfect son. "Jessica, it's so nice to finally meet you. Michael talks about you all the time." The lie was delivered with medical precision, smooth and practiced. I shook her hand and offered my own practiced smile. "Congratulations on your engagement. Michael's lucky to have found someone who shares his passion for helping people." It was the truth, even if everything else about this conversation felt like performance art. That's when my mother made her mistake. She'd been building up to it all morning, this moment when she could finally address the elephant that followed me to every family gathering. "Jessica's always been our free spirit," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that parents use when they're trying to spin failure into something more palatable. "She started college here at Riverside, but it just wasn't the right fit. She's been finding herself ever since, finding myself." As if the last 15 years had been some extended gap year adventure, instead of a career that had taken me to 6 continents and earned me responsibilities that would have terrified most people. As if the uniform hanging in my Norfolk apartment, with its ribbons and insignia that told the story of missions I could never discuss, was just elaborate dress-up. But I didn't correct her. I couldn't. Because some secrets are bigger than family pride. And some truths are worth protecting even when they make you look like everything you're not. The Thompson family hardware store had been the cornerstone of our lives long before I understood what duty meant or what sacrifice looked like. Every morning for the first 18 years of my life, I woke to the sound of my father's work boots on the hardwood floors, the ritual of coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the quiet pride of a man who had built something meaningful with his own hands. Robert Thompson didn't talk much about his time in Vietnam, but he carried those years in the careful way he organized inventory, the respectful manner he treated every customer, and the unwavering belief that honest work was the foundation of an honest life. Our house on Maple Street sat 3 blocks from the store, a modest 2-story colonial that Dad had bought with his veterans' benefits and Mom's savings from her job at the telephone company. The neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and where success was measured not by wealth, but by the respect you earned from your neighbors. Michael thrived in that environment from the moment he could walk. He was the child who helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with her groceries, who never forgot to say please and thank you, who brought home report cards that Dad would quietly tape to the refrigerator without saying a word. I was different from the beginning, and everyone knew it. While Michael collected baseball cards and learned to throw perfect spirals in the backyard, I was reading everything I could find about places that existed beyond the borders of our small world. The public library became my second home, where I devoured books about explorers, scientists, and leaders who had changed history through courage and determination. Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, would save new arrivals that she thought might interest me. Biographies of women who had broken barriers in fields dominated by men. Stories of individuals who had chosen difficult paths because they believed in something larger than themselves. Mom never quite knew what to make of my hunger for these stories. Patricia Thompson was a practical woman who believed in the value of stability, community ties, and making choices that kept families together. She had married my father when he returned from war, helped him build the business, and created a life that was predictable and secure. When I asked questions about what existed beyond Riverside, when I talked about wanting to travel or pursue careers that would take me far from home, she responded with the kind of gentle discouragement that parents use when they think they're protecting their children from disappointment. "Those are nice dreams, honey," she would say when I talked about wanting to see the ocean or visit other countries. "But real life is about finding your place in the world and making the best of it. We have everything we need right here." Michael understood this philosophy instinctively. He never questioned the assumption that success meant staying close to home, building on what previous generations had established, and measuring achievement by the approval of people who had known you your entire life. When he announced in high school that he wanted to become a doctor, the decision was celebrated not just because medicine was a respected profession, but because it meant he would be serving the same community that had raised him. Ryan fell somewhere between Michael and me, content to follow rather than lead, comfortable with the path of least resistance. He was the child who never caused problems, who accepted whatever decisions were made for him, and who seemed genuinely happy with a life that revolved around familiar routines and expectations. When he graduated high school, the assumption was that he would work at the hardware store until Dad was ready to retire, then gradually take over the business that had supported our family for decades. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more waiting beyond the horizon. Something that called to me in ways I couldn't explain to people who had never felt the same restlessness. The feeling intensified during my sophomore year at Riverside University, where I was studying business administration, with the vague intention of eventually helping with the family store. The coursework felt hollow, disconnected from anything that mattered to me on a fundamental level. I would sit in lectures about marketing strategies and profit margins, while my mind wandered to news reports about international crises, humanitarian disasters, and conflicts that required people with skills I didn't yet possess but desperately wanted to develop. The decision to leave came during spring semester, triggered by a guest speaker who visited one of my political science electives. Commander Rebecca Walsh was a Naval Academy graduate who spoke about her experiences leading peacekeeping missions in regions most Americans couldn't locate on a map. She described the challenge of coordinating relief efforts during natural disasters, the complexity of working with international partners to address global security issues, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that your daily work contributed to something larger than personal advancement. After her presentation, I approached her with questions that revealed how little I understood about military service, but how much I wanted to learn. Commander Walsh spent an hour talking with me about the Naval Academy, about the commitment required, and the opportunities available to those willing to make the sacrifice. She was honest about the difficulties, the years of training that would push me beyond anything I had experienced, and the reality that choosing this path would mean disappointing people who had different expectations for my life. "The question you need to ask yourself," she said as our conversation ended, "is whether you're willing to disappoint others in order to avoid disappointing yourself." That night, I called the Naval Academy admissions office and requested information about the application process. The materials arrived 3 weeks later, thick packets of forms and requirements that represented a future I could barely imagine but felt compelled to pursue. I filled out every page, wrote essays about leadership and service, and arranged for letters of recommendation from professors who understood my restlessness, even if they couldn't fully explain it. The hardest conversation was with my father. I found him in the store after hours, updating inventory records in his methodical handwriting, surrounded by the tools and supplies that represented his life's work. I explained my decision to apply to the Naval Academy, my reasons for wanting to serve, and my hope that he would understand, even if he couldn't support my choice. Dad listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions about the commitment I was considering. When I finished talking, he was quiet for several minutes, his pen resting on the ledger book as he processed what I had told him. Finally, he looked up with an expression I had never seen before, something that combined pride with profound sadness. "Your grandfather served in World War II," he said quietly. He never talked about it much, but he carried something with him that the rest of us could never fully understand. When I came back from Vietnam, I thought I was done with all that. I wanted to build something peaceful, something that would keep my children safe and close to home. He paused, studying my face as if trying to memorize it. "But maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you need to find out what you're capable of, even if it scares the hell out of the people who love you." My acceptance to the Naval Academy arrived on a Tuesday in March, delivered by a postal worker who had no idea he was carrying news that would change everything for our family. I read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in, then sat in my childhood bedroom trying to figure out how to tell my mother that I would be leaving in 6 months for a life she would never be able to fully comprehend. The conversation went exactly as I had expected. Mom cried, argued, pleaded, and finally retreated into the kind of disappointed silence that felt worse than any direct confrontation. Michael was supportive but confused, unable to understand why I would abandon a perfectly good life for something so uncertain and demanding. Ryan said very little, but I caught him watching me with an expression that suggested he envied my courage even if he couldn't summon the same determination for himself. The months between acceptance and departure passed in a strange suspension of time, with everyone in the family trying to pretend that normal life could continue while we all knew that something fundamental was ending. Dad helped me research what to expect during my first year, sharing stories about military training that he had never told before. Mom alternated between treating me like I was already gone and acting as if the Naval Academy was just another college that I would eventually outgrow. The morning I left for Annapolis, the entire family gathered on the front porch to say goodbye. It was early July, the air thick with humidity and the promise of another scorching Midwest summer. I had packed everything I was allowed to bring in a single duffel bag, following instructions that emphasized the importance of arriving with minimal personal possessions and maximum determination. Dad shook my hand with the formality of one service member acknowledging another, but his eyes held emotions he couldn't express in words. Mom hugged me longer than usual, whispering reminders to call home regularly and take care of myself. Michael promised to keep me updated about everything happening in Riverside, while Ryan just nodded and said he'd make sure the hardware store didn't fall apart without me. As I drove away from Maple Street that morning, I had no idea that it would be 15 years before I returned as anything other than a stranger in my own family's story. I thought I was embarking on an adventure that would eventually bring me home with experiences and perspectives that would enrich all of our lives. Instead, I was beginning a journey that would require me to become someone my family couldn't recognize, someone whose achievements would be invisible to them, and whose sacrifices would look like abandonment from their perspective. The helicopter's sound was growing stronger now, and I could see people throughout the graduation ceremony starting to point toward the sky with increasing interest and confusion. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in October, 8 months after Dad's funeral, when the autumn leaves were just beginning to turn and the hardware store was struggling through its first full season without Robert Thompson's steady, hand-guiding daily operations. I was aboard the USS Constellation somewhere in the Mediterranean, coordinating a humanitarian relief mission for earthquake victims in a region one couldn't name in my communications home when Ryan's email reached me through the ship's secure communication system. The subject line was deceptively simple: family meeting results, but the contents revealed a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that I had to read it 3 times before the reality settled into my bones like cold seawater. The family had held a meeting without me, a formal gathering to discuss the future of Thompson Hardware and the financial decisions that would affect all of us for years to come. Mom had called it, Michael had facilitated it, and Ryan had been outnumbered 2-1 in every vote that mattered. According to Ryan's carefully worded summary, the store was losing money faster than anyone had anticipated. The combination of big box retailers moving into the region, online competition cutting into traditional sales, and the ongoing costs of maintaining a building that Dad had never quite finished paying off, had created what Michael termed an unsustainable financial situation. The solution they had agreed upon was as practical as it was devastating. Sell the building, liquidate the inventory, and distribute the proceeds according to what Mom called, quote, current family circumstances and future potential. The translation was brutally clear. Michael, as the soon-to-be doctor with a medical degree and a bright future, would receive the largest share to help him establish his practice. Ryan, as the child who had stayed local and could be counted on to remain close to home, would receive enough to make a down payment on a modest house. And I, the daughter who had disappeared into military service and contributed nothing tangible to the family's financial stability, would receive what Mom described as, quote, a token amount, since Jessica has chosen a career that provides for all her needs. The casual dismissal of my contribution stung more than the financial inequality. 15 years of service, countless months away from everything familiar. The physical and emotional toll of missions I couldn't describe to them had been reduced to a career choice that apparently absolved them of any obligation to treat me as an equal heir to Dad's legacy. The hardware store wasn't just a business to me. It was the physical embodiment of everything my father had worked to build, the tangible proof that Robert Thompson had mattered in the world. But what cut deepest was the timing. They had made these decisions while I was literally unreachable, leading an operation that required communication blackouts for security reasons. Ryan's email had been sent 4 days earlier, but I was only receiving it now as we approached a port where secure communications could be reestablished. The family meeting had been scheduled during a period when they knew I couldn't participate, couldn't object, couldn't even ask questions about the reasoning behind their choices. Michael's involvement in the decision felt like a particular betrayal, because I had always believed that beneath our differences, we maintained some fundamental respect for each other. He was intelligent enough to understand that my absence wasn't indifference, that military service required sacrifices that civilian careers didn't demand. Yet he had participated in a process that treated my years of dedication as essentially worthless, my commitment to something larger than myself, as evidence that I didn't deserve an equal voice in family matters. The legal documents were already in motion, according to Ryan's update. Mom had consulted with a lawyer who specialized in small business liquidation, and Michael had provided financial projections that demonstrated the wisdom of selling, while the building still had some market value. The process would be completed within 6 months, with the assumption that I would sign whatever paperwork was required without causing complications or delays. I forwarded Ryan's email to my commanding officer with a request for emergency leave, knowing that my explanation would have to be carefully crafted to avoid revealing the personal nature of the crisis. The Navy doesn't grant leave for family financial disputes, but it does provide support for service members dealing with unexpected emergencies that affect their ability to focus on mission requirements. Commander Mitchell approved my request within hours, understanding that someone of my rank and responsibility couldn't afford to be distracted by unresolved personal matters during critical operations. The flight home from Norfolk took 3 hours, but the drive from the airport to Riverside felt like crossing into a foreign country where I no longer spoke the language. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down, as if the town itself was struggling with the same economic pressures that were forcing families like mine to make impossible choices. The hardware store building stood empty when I drove past, a for sale sign already planted in the small patch of grass that Dad had maintained, with the same attention he gave to his inventory records. Mom was waiting at the house when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread in front of her like battle plans. She looked older than I remembered, the years since Dad's death having carved new lines around her eyes and mouth. But her expression was resolute, the face of someone who had made difficult decisions and was prepared to defend them against any challenge. "I suppose Ryan told you about our meeting," she said without looking up from the papers. "I'm sorry you couldn't be here, but these things can't wait for everyone's convenience." The dismissal was delivered with the tone she had perfected over the years, a combination of maternal authority and practical resignation that made disagreement seem both futile and slightly childish. I sat across from her at the same table where we had eaten thousands of family meals, where I had done homework under Dad's patient supervision, where we had celebrated Michael's acceptance to medical school and Ryan's graduation from high school. "Mom, we need to talk about this decision. The store meant everything to Dad. Selling it feels like erasing everything he worked to build." She finally looked up, her eyes holding the kind of tired patience that parents reserve for children who refuse to accept reality. "Jessica, your father is gone. The store is losing money every month. Michael has student loans that will take him years to pay off, and Ryan needs to start building some kind of future for himself. You have your military career, your benefits, your security. The rest of us have to live in the real world." The real world. The phrase hung between us like an accusation, the implication that my 15 years of service existed in some fantasy realm that didn't count toward actual adult responsibility. I thought about the missions I couldn't describe to her, the lives that had been saved through operations I had planned and executed, the international crises that had been resolved through work that required skills she couldn't imagine, and dedication she had never been asked to demonstrate. What about Dad's wishes? He never talked about selling the store. He talked about it being something that would last, something that would connect our family to this community, for generations. Mom's expression hardened, the mask of maternal patience slipping to reveal something colder and more calculated underneath. "Your father had a lot of dreams that didn't match up with reality. He thought you would come home after your military service and help run the business. He thought Michael might practice medicine here in Riverside, instead of moving to Columbus. He thought Ryan would develop some initiative instead of just showing up for work every day without any real investment in the future." The words were delivered with surgical precision, each one designed to cut away the romantic notions I might have harbored about Dad's vision for our family's legacy. But there was something else in her tone, something that suggested this conversation was about more than financial practicality. This was about punishment, about consequences for choices that had disappointed her, about ensuring that the daughter who had chosen duty over family comfort wouldn't benefit from sacrifices she hadn't made. Michael arrived while we were still talking, letting himself in through the kitchen door with the casual familiarity of someone who had never really left home. He was wearing the confident expression of a man who had never doubted his place in the world, never questioned whether his choices would be understood or supported by the people who mattered most to him. "Jess, I'm glad you could make it home," he said, settling into the chair that had been his place at the table since childhood. "I know this whole situation with the store is complicated, but I think we've found the best solution for everyone involved." The casual assumption that he could speak for everyone involved, that his definition of best automatically applied to the rest of us, revealed everything I needed to know about how this family now functioned in my absence. Michael had become the de facto head of household, the son whose opinions carried weight because he had chosen a path that made sense to people who measured success by income potential and social status. "I'm not sure selling Dad's business is the best solution for anyone," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "Maybe there are other options we haven't explored yet." Michael exchanged a glance with Mom, one of those silent communications that longtime allies use to coordinate their responses to opposition. "Jess, I know you have emotional attachments to the store, but emotion isn't a sustainable business model. I've run the numbers, looked at market trends, consulted with financial advisors. The math is pretty clear. The math." As if 15 years of my father's hopes and dreams could be reduced to columns of figures that proved their worthlessness. As if the relationships he had built with customers who trusted him to provide quality tools and honest advice could be quantified in terms that made liquidation seem inevitable. The sound of rotor blades cutting through the morning air was unmistakable now, a rhythmic thundering that seemed to pulse in sync with my heartbeat, as I stood among hundreds of graduation ceremony attendees who had no idea their quiet celebration was about to become something entirely different. The Navy helicopter appeared as a dark silhouette against the brilliant Ohio sky, its approach precise and deliberate, following coordinates I had provided during weeks of careful planning that my family knew nothing about. My phone buzzed with the final confirmation message. "Admiral Thompson, we have visual contact with ceremony location. Requesting permission for formal arrival protocol. Media personnel have been cleared from immediate landing zone. Security sweep complete. Ready to proceed on your command." I typed back quickly, my fingers steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to unleash. "Execute formal arrival. Full military honors. Prepare for immediate brief with ceremony officials." Around me, conversations were beginning to fade as more people noticed the approaching aircraft. University security personnel were speaking urgently into their radios, trying to determine whether this was part of some elaborate surprise they hadn't been informed about. Dr. Hayes was pointing skyward, her medical training probably making her wonder if this was some kind of emergency response. My mother had stopped talking entirely, her face tilted upward with an expression of growing confusion and concern. Michael stepped closer to our small family group, his graduation cap slightly askew as he craned his neck to get a better view of the helicopter. "That's military," he said with the confidence of someone who had watched enough movies to recognize the obvious. "Probably some kind of demonstration or flyover for the ceremony. Pretty impressive that Riverside managed to arrange something like that." The irony of his assumption would have been amusing under different circumstances. My brother, the soon-to-be doctor who prided himself on analytical thinking and careful observation, was about to discover that some of the most important truths in life are hidden in plain sight, disguised as assumptions we make about people we think we know completely. Ryan appeared beside me, his expression troubled in a way that had become familiar over the past few years. At 28, he had developed an intuitive understanding of family dynamics that often made him the first to sense when something significant was about to happen. He studied my face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read subtle signs, the way our father had once been able to predict weather changes by watching cloud formations. "Jess, do you know anything about this?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the increasing noise of the helicopter's approach. "You seem awfully calm for someone watching a military aircraft descend on their brother's graduation ceremony." I met his gaze directly, seeing in his eyes the same restlessness that had driven me away from Riverside 15 years earlier. Ryan had always been caught between worlds, too independent to accept the limitations of small-town life, but too loyal to abandon the family that needed him. He had become the keeper of family secrets, the one who noticed things others missed, the bridge between what people said and what they actually meant. "I think you're about to learn some things about your sister that might surprise you," I said softly, watching his expression shift from confusion to something approaching understanding. The helicopter was close enough now that its downdraft was beginning to affect the carefully arranged graduation ceremony setup. Programs fluttered in people's hands, caps required sudden adjustment, and the university's banner stretched across the main stage rippled like a flag in a storm. The pilot was executing a textbook approach to the designated landing zone, a section of the campus quad that had been cleared and secured according to specifications I had provided weeks earlier. Commander Sarah Mitchell's voice came through my earpiece, nearly inaudible to anyone else but crystal clear to me through the specialized communication device I wore. "Admiral, we're beginning final approach. University officials have been briefed on emergency protocols. Local law enforcement has been notified. Are you prepared for public identification?" Public identification. The phrase carried weight that extended far beyond the immediate moment. For 15 years, I had maintained operational security that required my family to remain unaware of my actual rank, my real responsibilities, and the scope of missions I had commanded. The woman they knew as their disappointing daughter, the family failure who had dropped out of college and disappeared into an uncertain military career, was about to be revealed as something they had never imagined possible. I pressed the nearly invisible button on my communication device. "Affirmative, Commander. Proceed with full protocol. I'm ready for identification." The helicopter touched down with the precision that comes from hundreds of hours of training and countless real-world operations in far more challenging conditions than a university graduation ceremony. The landing was so smooth that many people in the crowd didn't immediately realize the aircraft had settled onto the ground. It sat there for a moment, rotors still turning, while figures in crisp Navy uniforms emerged from its interior, with the coordinated efficiency of a unit that had performed this ritual many times before. Dr. Hayes was staring at the scene with the focused attention of someone trying to process information that didn't fit her existing understanding of the situation. "Michael, this is extraordinary. I've never seen anything like this at a graduation ceremony. Do you think someone important is being honored? Maybe a distinguished alumnus or a major donor?" My mother's confusion was transforming into something approaching anxiety as she watched uniformed personnel establish a security perimeter around the helicopter. "This seems excessive for a university event," she said, her voice carrying the tone she used when she suspected that someone wasn't telling her the complete truth about something important. "Jessica, you're military. What does all this mean? I was military. The phrase hung in the air between us, carrying all the assumptions and limitations my family had placed on my service over the past 15 years. To them, being military meant wearing a uniform to a job that provided steady pay and reliable benefits, following orders given by other people, perhaps occasionally traveling to places that sounded exotic but were probably not much different from military bases anywhere else in the world. They had no frame of reference for understanding that the military was a hierarchical organization where authority and responsibility increased dramatically as you moved up the ranks. They couldn't conceive of a world where their disappointing daughter might have climbed those ranks not just through time served, but through demonstrated leadership, strategic thinking, and the kind of decision-making abilities that earned trust from people whose own lives depended on getting those decisions right. Commander Mitchell was walking toward our location now, her stride purposeful and her expression respectful but serious. She was flanked by two other officers whose uniforms displayed ribbons and insignia that told stories my family couldn't read but that communicated volumes to anyone with military experience. Behind them, the helicopter's crew maintained their positions, ready to respond to whatever instructions they might receive. Michael was watching this approach with the analytical mind that had served him well in medical school, trying to piece together information that would explain why a military helicopter had landed at his graduation ceremony and why uniformed personnel seemed to be heading directly toward our family group. His confidence was beginning to waver as he realized that this situation was developing in ways that had nothing to do with university-arranged pageantry. "Mom, I think something unusual is happening here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the first notes of uncertainty I had heard from him all morning. "This looks more like an official military operation than a ceremonial flyover." Commander Mitchell stopped approximately 6 feet from our group and executed a precise salute that she held until I returned it with the automatic response that had been drilled into me through decades of service. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it communicated everything my family needed to know about the relationship between the woman they thought they knew and the officer who had just acknowledged her authority. "Admiral Thompson," Commander Mitchell said, her voice carrying clearly despite the background noise of the helicopter's engines. "I apologize for the delay in our arrival. We encountered some minor air traffic complications that required route adjustments. Are you prepared to proceed with the planned briefing? Admiral Thompson." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that surrounded our family group. I could see my mother's lips moving slightly, as if she was trying to repeat what she had heard to make sure her ears hadn't deceived her. Michael's expression had frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Ryan was staring at me with an intensity that suggested he was recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his older sister. Dr. Hayes broke the silence first, her medical training probably helping her process shocking information more quickly than the rest of my family. "Admiral," she said, the word carrying a mixture of surprise and respect. "Jessica, you're an admiral in the United States Navy?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a signal flare, marking the moment when 15 years of carefully maintained fiction began to dissolve. I had been promoted to admiral 3 years earlier, following a mission in the South China Sea that I still couldn't discuss in detail, but that had resulted in the peaceful resolution of a situation that could have escalated into international conflict. The promotion had come with responsibilities that included oversight of humanitarian operations, coordination with allied naval forces, and command authority over assets that included the helicopter that had just delivered Commander Mitchell to my brother's graduation ceremony. "Yes," I said simply, meeting Dr. Hayes' gaze directly. "I've been serving at flag rank for the past 3 years." My mother's face had gone pale, the color draining away as if someone had opened a valve that released all her assumptions about her daughter's life and achievements. "But you said you were just in the Navy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the background noise of the ceremony that was continuing around us. "You never said anything about being an officer, let alone an admiral." The accusation in her tone was unmistakable, the implication that I had somehow deceived them through deliberate omission. But the reality was more complicated than deception. Military careers that involve classified operations and sensitive responsibilities require a level of operational security that extends to family members. For 15 years, I had been walking a careful line between maintaining the personal relationships that mattered to me and protecting information that could affect national security if it fell into the wrong hands. "Mom, there are things about military service that I couldn't discuss, even with family," I said gently, trying to help her understand without revealing more than was appropriate even now. Some of my assignments required security clearances that came with restrictions on what I could share about my work. Michael was staring at me as if I had suddenly transformed into someone he had never met before. His confidence in his own understanding of the world was cracking visibly as he processed the implications of what he was learning. "Jess, admirals command fleets," he said slowly, his medical school training in anatomy and physiology, providing him with enough knowledge of military hierarchy to understand the magnitude of what had just been revealed. "They're responsible for thousands of personnel and millions of dollars in equipment. They make decisions that affect international relations." The accuracy of his assessment was both impressive and painful. Michael's quick grasp of what my rank actually meant highlighted just how completely my family had underestimated not just my achievements, but my capabilities. They had spent years treating me like someone who had failed to reach her potential, someone whose life choices were evidence of poor judgment and lack of ambition. The revelation that I had actually achieved a level of responsibility and authority that most people could only imagine was forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics. Commander Mitchell was waiting patiently for my response to her question about the planned briefing, her military bearing intact, despite the obvious family drama unfolding around her. She had been briefed on the purpose of today's operation, the personal nature of the revelation I was making, and the importance of maintaining professional decorum while allowing me to handle the family aspects of the situation. "Commander, please proceed with the briefing for ceremony officials," I said, falling back on military protocol as a way to maintain control over a situation that was becoming emotionally overwhelming. "I'll join you in 5 minutes to address any questions they might have about security protocols." She nodded and moved toward a group of university administrators who had been watching our exchange with expressions of growing amazement and concern. The presence of a Navy admiral at their graduation ceremony was the kind of unexpected development that required immediate consultation with campus security, public relations personnel, and probably several levels of academic administration. Ryan was the first member of my family to find his voice after Commander Mitchell's departure. "Jess, how long have you been an admiral?" he asked, his tone careful and respectful in a way that was completely different from how my family normally spoke to me. 3 years, I replied, watching his face as he calculated backwards to when the promotion had occurred. "I was selected for flag rank following a mission that I still can't discuss in detail. The promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon." The Pentagon. Another piece of information that forced my family to adjust their understanding of my life and career. They had assumed that my military service involved assignments to bases they had never heard of, routine duties that provided steady employment, perhaps occasional deployments to places that were interesting but not particularly significant. The idea that I had stood in the Pentagon receiving promotion to admiral rank from senior Navy leadership was so far beyond their conception of my abilities that it might as well have involved space travel. My mother was struggling to process this new information, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman who apparently commanded the respect of military personnel and the attention of helicopter crews. "Jessica, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just an ordinary sailor?" The question revealed the depth of her misunderstanding about both my service and my motivations for maintaining operational security. There was no such thing as just an ordinary sailor in the United States Navy. Every person who put on the uniform had volunteered to serve something larger than themselves, had committed to defending principles and people they might never meet, had accepted risks and responsibilities that most civilians couldn't imagine. But more than that, her question showed that she still didn't understand the fundamental nature of classified work and security clearances. I hadn't let them think anything. I had followed protocols that were designed to protect operations, personnel, and national interests. The fact that these protocols had required me to appear less accomplished than I actually was had been a personal cost I was willing to pay in service of larger responsibilities. "Mom, I took an oath when I received my first security clearance," I explained, hoping she could understand the weight of that commitment. "That oath required me to protect classified information, even from people I love. Some of the work I've done over the past 15 years, could affect international relations if it became public knowledge. My obligations to national security had to take precedence over my desire to share my achievements with family. The helicopter's engines were beginning to wind down now, the rotors slowing to a stop as the crew completed their shutdown procedures. The quiet that followed felt almost unnatural after the thunderous noise of our arrival. Around us, the graduation ceremony was continuing, but I could see that many people were more interested in the military personnel and the aircraft than in the academic proceedings they had come to witness. Dr. Hayes was studying me with the clinical attention she probably reserved for complex medical cases, trying to piece together information that would help her understand how she had so completely misjudged someone she had met only hours earlier. "Admiral Thompson, may I ask what kind of missions you've been commanding? Obviously nothing classified, but perhaps you could give us some general idea of your responsibilities?" The question was respectful and genuinely curious, coming from someone who was beginning to understand that she had been making assumptions based on incomplete information. I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge that she had been wrong about me and her desire to learn more rather than simply defending her previous judgments. "I've been involved primarily in humanitarian operations and peacekeeping missions," I said, choosing my words carefully to provide accurate information without revealing operational details. "My commands have included relief efforts following natural disasters, coordination with international naval forces during crisis response operations, and oversight of programs that provide medical assistance to civilian populations in conflict zones." Michael was listening with the intense focus he probably brought to medical lectures, his analytical mind working to understand the scope of what I was describing. "Jess, that sounds like you've been saving lives on a scale that most doctors never achieve," he said quietly, and for the first time since my arrival in Riverside, I heard genuine respect in his voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had spent years studying to become a physician, dedicating his life to healing and helping people, earning the admiration of our family and community for his noble career choice. Yet my own work, which had involved coordinating medical assistance for thousands of people in crisis situations around the world, had been dismissed as a disappointing career choice that provided little value to anyone. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted my thoughts as Commander Mitchell returned with several university officials in tow. The group included the Dean of Students, the head of campus security, and what appeared to be a public relations representative, who was already holding a tablet and taking notes about how to handle media inquiries regarding the unexpected military presence at their graduation ceremony. "Admiral Thompson," the dean said, extending his hand with the deference that academic administrators typically reserved for major donors or distinguished alumni. "I'm Dean Harrison. We're honored by your presence at today's ceremony, though I must admit we're somewhat surprised by the nature of your arrival. Is there anything we can do to assist with your needs?" The formal nature of his address was another shock for my family, who were witnessing me being treated with a level of respect and deference they had never imagined I could command. Dean Harrison's tone and manner made it clear that he understood exactly what it meant to have a Navy admiral attend his graduation ceremony, and he was determined to ensure that both the military and the university handled the situation with appropriate dignity. "Dean Harrison, I apologize for any disruption our arrival may have caused," I replied, falling into the formal speech patterns that came naturally when dealing with civilian officials in professional settings. "I'm here in a personal capacity to witness my brother's graduation from medical school. The helicopter transport was necessary due to scheduling constraints related to ongoing operations that required my immediate return to Norfolk following today's ceremony." The explanation was carefully crafted to sound both official and personal, providing enough detail to satisfy the dean's curiosity, while making it clear that my presence was both a family matter and a military operation that had been coordinated through proper channels. I could see my family absorbing this information, beginning to understand that my life involved responsibilities that required military transport and scheduling around operations they knew nothing about. My mother was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, something that combined pride, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of understanding that she had fundamentally misjudged her daughter's life and achievements. The woman who had spent years apologizing for my choices to neighbors and relatives was beginning to realize that those choices had led to accomplishments that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. The transformation in how my family was looking at me was both satisfying and heartbreaking. I had spent 15 years wanting their respect and understanding, hoping that somehow they would recognize my service as valuable, even if they couldn't know the details. Now that recognition was finally happening, but it was coming at the cost of revealing just how completely they had underestimated both my abilities and my commitment to serving something larger than myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.